Remarkably, you still see the legacy of the Mita in Peru today. Peru is a South American country. Take the differences between the provinces of Calca and nearby Acomayo. There appears to be few differences among these provinces. Both are high in the mountains and each is inhabited by the Quechua-speaking descendants of the Incas. Yet, Acomayo is much poorer, with its inhabitants consuming about 1/3 less than those in Calca. The people know this. In Acomayo, they ask intrepid foreigners, "Don't you know that the people here are poorer than the people over there in Calca? Why would you ever want to come here?" If you've been wondering what Cusca or Calca and Acomayo have got to do with you and your life, they have got a lot to do. Because today, I, Krishna Jonakadla, host of Maharajas of Scale, am reviewing a book called Why Nations Fail. This is a phenomenal, outstanding, and a seminal book. In fact, I've not come across a book of this kind in the last 30-40 years. I've been reading books. This book is an outstanding read. It tends to explain a lot of questions that are there on our mind. Let me outline what some of those questions are. You may be a traveler. You may have traveled across the world, or you may even have traveled across or within a country, and you may be wondering, why are certain countries more prosperous than the rest? People are the same. People seem to be the same. There seem to be hardworking people everywhere, but yet one country is poor and the other country is way rich and way developed. What's the reason for that? How did countries and lands that were barely inhabited, take the example of Canada, the United States of America, Australia, and New Zealand. The native people barely covered small parts of these countries. Yet, these countries are amongst the list of most developed nations, or perhaps they top the list of developed nations across the planet. Why did they develop? Whereas countries with significantly high population or inhabitants, let's say South America, Mexico, India, Africa, Asia, why are they still poor and continue to be poor? Answers to these kind of questions can be found in this book. There are a few more questions, and these questions continue to haunt major political and economic and historical discourses related to history even today. And therefore, it is very pertinent for us to discuss these. And some of those questions are, did Western powers, the so-called Western powers, loot the countries they colonized? Colonization started somewhere around the 16th century. And in that 16th century, one of the first countries or Western powers that started colonizing the rest of the world were the Spanish and then the Portuguese. Eventually, they were replaced by the British and the Dutch and the French. There were vast differences in the way in which these powers colonized. However, some of the powers that came much later, which is the British, the Dutch, and the French, learned some of the same barbaric lessons or the tactics that the Spanish and the Portuguese actually employed. They didn't have to, but they actually had been shown the wrong way. Did they loot the countries? They did. But the question is, how did they loot those countries? Were there any historical precedents in those countries that actually gave way to that? And then the perennial question, why do certain nations remain poor while other nations actually get rich and continue to stay that way? Mind you, here we are not talking about getting rich for a short period of time. I got intrigued by the so-called Wealth of Nations. It's a book by Adam Smith. About 2.5 decades ago, when I was still in my teens, and I always wondered why some nations are prosperous and some nations are not. I've been reading books. I've possibly read about 150 books on the topic, but I've never found a satisfactory answer. And some economists, some theorists, some historians have offered culture as an example, that people in some nations are more industrious, but nothing can be further from the truth. So the reason nations remain poor is because of 3 or 4 conditions. And this book actually goes into detailed explanations. One is the presence of an elite, a small set of people that actually rule over vast tracts of people. That's number one. Number two is the political structure is structured in such a way, or the political economy or politics is structured in such a way that these small set of elite deprive widespread powers to the rest of the people. So therefore, there are no economic resources that they can actually exploit for themselves. And then the third is something called as existence of inclusive institution. And in existence of inclusive institutions is a direct outgrowth of the fact that power is widely distributed. And the last one is what is called as creative destruction. You have one set of economy or economic conditions that are actually replaced by a totally new set of economic conditions. So the greatest example that we can offer is, let's say, in the era of transportation, for example, in India, you had scooters for a long time, which was actually majorly manufactured by Bajaj and the Hero Honda companies. Now, if those are replaced by public transportation, such as the metros, which are mushrooming across the country, now that is a form of creative destruction. What it is doing is it is replacing one inefficient form of transportation and replacing with a totally new form of transportation. Now that you've heard the reasons why you should read this book, you're perhaps wondering that what I am actually sharing here does not hold a lot of water. However, the conditions actually haven't changed. Let's contrast 2 countries, the United States and India. And then let's take an example, which is film industry. For a country of 1.3 billion population, you don't have more than 10 to 15 actors. You want more examples of these extractive conditions continuing to exist in the country? No more than at best 50 families rule a nation of 1.3 billion people. And when it comes to economics, you have what is called as the Bombay Club, which is made up of the Tatas, the Birlas, the Mahindras, those families which dominated industry at the dawn of independence and much before that, continue to dominate businesses even today. The only entrant in that is the Ambani family, which is Reliance. The answer is humanity has found answers to each one of these troubling questions, but it cannot come from one person. It cannot come from a small set of people. Growth, economics, politics has to be widespread, has to be inclusive. And when that happens, a nation can embark and say truly that it's on the road to prosperity. So go read this book, enrich yourself, and grow your country, grow your company, grow your organization, whatever it is, and come back and share with me here how this changed. Implement it, benefit from it, and share with the rest of the world. This is Krishna Jonakadla reviewing Why Nations Fail. Until the next book review.